Chapter 3 Jafari. Given the order by my queen, I followed the Anunnaki guardsmen to the tomb of Khufu. They were hot on our trail, and we needed to get them off. If we were to live in peace, away from the murderous hands of the Sky People, we needed to rid ourselves of anything that compromised our position. The tomb was far enough away from civilization that they could not easily track us through it, but there was also no telling if anyone would be able to follow us. I knew, however, that the tomb was a way for the Anunnaki to communicate with those spies. Some pets who betrayed their own kind and swore allegiance to the aliens' cause. It seemed like this particular spy had been following us for some time. I wondered how much they already knew about us. I feared the worst should he know too much. By my judgment, the guardsman was not a very bright one, or he would have picked up my scent by now. He may still be able to do so, but I hoped his nose would not give me away until we reached the tomb. There I would make sure he could not contact his overseers again. I was not fond of killing. No one should be fond of taking the life of another, but one must do what one can to survive. As a vampire, I knew better than most the consequences of being discovered. In order to keep myself alive and to ensure that others could remain free, I had to kill those who stood in our way. We had already lost many of our brothers and sisters. My heart ached at the memory of my youngest sibling taken from us without mercy. My maiden creator had only just turned her, a sweet girl who looked to become the next queen of Egypt. She was beautiful, and she loved me more than life itself. I smiled at the thought, for Cleo would not appreciate the sentiment. My maiden creator found the girl wandering the desert after the Persians had ransacked her village. She was weak, malnourished, and covered in dust. Her clothes had long since fallen apart and were little more than rags. My maiden creator took care of her, feeding her and tending to her wounds. After a few weeks, once the girl had recovered, she was made one of us. Never was there ever a girl with a sweeter nature than her. I had left them for just a moment to gather supplies in the city when the Anunnaki guardsmen found my family and butchered them in cold blood. Their leader, the man who led the attack, was named Aziz. His eyes burned red, and he had skin the color of polished oak wood. The smell of death hung heavily over him, and he smelled like nothing more than a rotting corpse. I used my lithe form and knowledge of keeping to the shadows to my advantage. A lesser creature would have blundered into things blindly, making mistakes that cost lives, mine included. But I am cunning, patient, and willing to sacrifice any pawn in my path. I had come to hate the enemy, but even then, my mind was clear and sharp. The stench of decayed flesh and metal overwhelmed my sharp senses for a moment after entering the tomb. I had to keep on the target lest he got away, as much as it hurt to breathe in. Even here, in a place of such beauty, there was a foul odour hanging heavily upon the air, perhaps because all men carry the stink of fear with them wherever they go. This young god had a touch of it in his aura, though I could not say whether he was fearful or merely cautious. Or perhaps I was wrong and he could feel my presence. At one point or another, I knew I would have to intercept him, stop him from reaching his destination before it was too late. Failure to complete my task was never an option. That alone was reason enough to succeed. With every step closer to my quarry, I felt the burning heat grow stronger inside me. Bloodlust rose, filling me with a rage beyond compare. My body began to tremble, but my thoughts remained calm. When we neared the center of the tomb, where the body of King Khufu lay, something within me urged me forward. That was where the guardsman would meet his end. Perfect evening for a grave robin, is it not? I said, stepping from the shadows. The guardsman turned to face me faster than the human eye could see. Already I could smell the change in fearful emotion. "Here," the guard cried out, dropping the torch he held in one hand. "Stay back." He raised his spear above his head in warning. The man was twice my size in muscle and much taller than me. The sight of him would have frightened any man, and rightly so. But I was not any man, and I was stupid. I could tell in his eyes that he was every bit frightened of me, as I was not of him. "Me?" I asked, feigning offence with a hand over my heart. "How rude. You do not even know who I am. That offends me." His nostrils flared and his lips curled slightly upward in disgust. It was obvious by now what he thought of our kind. The men and women like him saw themselves as superior to anything else in this world. Only their own desires mattered. For all intents and purposes, I did not give two shits about him. "I'll kill you, worthless scum." He spat back at me with a snarl. I leaned slightly backward as if to taunt him with my arms spread outward on either side and said, "Then come here and kill me." That was all the incentive he needed. Without further hesitation, he charged at me, holding his spear high above his head. He was fast and very strong. In truth, I feared no man alive except for those belonging to my clan. To show fear to these animals was folly. Yet still I stepped lightly aside and grabbed his leg with my right arm while kicking up hard against his stomach with my left foot. We were close together when he stumbled forward onto his knees. Then down he went completely as my knee came up between his shoulder blades. The stone cracked as his body hit the floor. My victory was short-lived, however, as he rose to his feet with a dangerous fury in his eyes. They looked red and angry, more proof that he was afraid of me. As soon as he moved, I wove to the side with lightning speed. 1 second I was standing beside him, and in the next he leapt upon me with substantial force, knocking the wind out of me. He used his great size to his advantage in battle. Although, among the warriors in Egypt, I was the most skilled with the kopish. Not many other humans possessed the strength necessary to wield it effectively. There are only a few others, besides myself, that can fight with swords, daggers, and spears as well as they do. Of course, there are some who have greater skill with weapons, especially in certain situations. My opponent was no exception to this. He matched my movements with his own curved blade blow for blow. The sound of metal clashing against metal echoed against the stone walls. He tried to overpower me through sheer brute strength. If he succeeded, then he would likely win easily. A lucky cut or thrust would find its mark. I just didn't want to take that chance. He screamed profanities at me in a language I did not understand as we fought. I thought then that I might have underestimated the guardsman's skill. His blows were indeed sharp enough, but somehow mine always seemed quicker and stronger, cutting into him with deadly precision. This was because he attacked too rashly. He allowed himself to get distracted. He used my arrogance against me and, with what strength he could summon in the middle of a battle, thrust me through the wall of Khufu's tomb with a simple fist, where his sarcophagus lay. This in turn knocked both sense into, and the wind out of, me. It took one dangerous moment to gather myself, one that did not last all that long. Just in time to meet my opponent, I rose, and with a single swipe, cleaved my sword through the air and sliced the hapless guardsman's throat. Blood gushed forth, pooling underneath him as he fell, lifeless, to the ground. It stank foul in the enclosed space of the crypt. With adrenaline still pulsing through my veins from the battle, my eye caught someone watching on from the shadows. It enraged me because she might have been the one the guardsman was meant to meet. I was on her before she could escape me and return to her people. Her throat clasped firmly in my hand. The clothes of this woman were like none I had ever seen, not even on the back of an Anunnaki. She smelled just as strange in the way I felt when first meeting Cleopatra. Something about her made my senses prickle and burn with curiosity. Those eyes, full of intense fear, reminded me of someone I had almost forgotten long ago. She did not have the appearance of the Sky People, yet she could be one of their experiments as well. In a moment of spite and disgust, I thought I would destroy their pet, make her something they detested as a kick in the groin to their ego. I sunk my teeth into the tender flesh of her neck, remembering how my maiden creator once turned my sister and left her there in the dark to get rid of the guardsman. Under the cover of night, I took her to the holding cells where the poor souls who waited their trials would suffer. I did not agree with most of the things Cleo did, but God's forbid if I ever voiced those concerns. Already I could see the young woman change in my arms, her blood-spotted skin smoothing out any human blemish, her more refined facial features accentuated further. I knew she would be a sight to behold, and I knew her masters would hate her for it. Their pride would never allow them to accept such a thing into their ranks. But I wasn't thinking of anything except making sure she lived long enough to tell the tale of my wrath. Cleo would disapprove of my rash decision, whine about how her absence would draw attention to us instead of warding away the enemy. I admit already that she was right, yet there was nothing I could do. The deed had been done. Until we knew the purpose of the woman in Egypt, it was against our nature to attack one of our own. Cleo would simply have to deal with her existence until then. Even though she now bore the face of another, it must remain secret for the time being. Once in the city, I confronted the gods to lead me to an empty cell. They knew better than to ask questions and did as I asked them. There I leapt down to the balls of the rancid cell and placed her gently on the floor, unsure of why I had not just dropped her like a cumbersome sack and left her. As she slept peacefully on the cold stone, the only light coming in through the bars above, I looked upon her beauty. My anger ebbed at the sight. For the briefest of moments, I considered letting her go free. Oh, but Cleo would love that. On the way to the palace, I braced myself for what I knew would come next. I prayed to whatever god or goddess would listen that she was in a good mood. There were some passers-by who gave me questionable stares at the blood on my hands and clothing, yet my status would not allow them to raise awareness. The people knew who I was, and those who did not were too afraid to make eye contact. If they spoke up, they'd likely pay with their lives. So they kept silent. A smile crossed my lips as I realized that perhaps these men were not so different from the ones trying to take me down. The ambition and greed of the wealthy never ceased to amaze such a humble vampire. Every one of them wanted to get closer to the queen, but she could trust none of them, not without getting killed. When finally reaching the throne room, I heard music echoing off the marble walls and saw the shadow of Cleopatra dancing across its surface. What I didn't know was whether she danced with abandon, unaware of all the dangers awaiting her, or merely enjoyed herself while knowing she was alone in the darkness. I wondered what the solitary celebration was for. Without the heart to stop such recklessness, I leaned against the arch of the entrance and watched in silence. I could not stop the tender smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. It was clear she loved to dance, that she found pleasure in movement and expression far greater than humans possessed. I admired her for it. Her eyes fell on me, and her movements ceased. Still, that jovial look on her face never disappeared. I knew at once I confessed my deviance to the original plan. I was the older vampire, the stronger one, yet she could make me uneasy with just one glance. "Good to see you back earlier than expected," she greeted warmly. I stepped inside and bowed low before her. "Good evening, Your Majesty." She returned the gesture and motioned towards a nearby chair. We sat side by side, gazing at each other for several minutes before she spoke again. She stared directly into my eyes when asking, "What happened?" Her tone remained even. No hint of judgment came along with it. Just curiosity. Like a child curious about something forbidden, wanting to understand the reason behind the act rather than condemning it outright. I explained the events as well as I could, following the guardsman to Khufu's tomb, doing what had to be done. Then I could not keep my voice from trailing as I thought about that strange young woman turning in her prison. Cleo noticed the sudden change, and her eyes grew ever curiouser. "Jafari, what are you not telling me?" she questioned, her right brow quirked and her lips upturned in an impish smirk. I knew she would gain the information eventually, so I thought it better that it came from me than a favour-seeking lowborn. I sucked in a deep breath, my chest protruding, and regaled her with the foreign woman. What I had done to her, what I had thought of her, where I had contained her. Cleopatra closed her eyes and breathed in deep herself, her jaw jutting outward as though she kept a sudden outburst from escaping. Her head tilted to one side as she clenched a fist, not uttering a word until I had done speaking. When she finally did open her eyes, they were no longer filled with curiosity. They burned like hot coals. For a moment, we held eye contact, mine burning away any remnants of remorse. I could not explain the defensive feeling that clouded my judgment, but it overtook all else. as if they were another person standing between us now, watching our every move. Then suddenly she rose to stand over me. "What were you thinking?" she asked with a hiss. "How did you ever think turning one of theirs wouldn't draw their attention? How much damage to your brain did the Nanuki spy do?" With the last question, she pushed an index finger against my forehead. There was much I would tolerate from the Queen, but even I had my limitation. Such actions were unacceptable beyond them. My hand shot out and grabbed hold of hers, preventing it from leaving my skin. With a glare and raised eyebrow, she pulled free. In response, my fangs extended fully. I growled through them, showing my teeth and snarling at her in anger. Even I knew that this was foolish behavior, but it took only seconds for me to lose control. The Queen recoiled in surprise. I had never challenged or defied her in all her years of rule, never given proof of how dangerous I truly was. This time, however, my reaction was too strong. I could not allow her insult to go unpunished, so instead of striking her down where she stood, I left her room silently. That morning, I trained with my men, testing the arm of our new soldiers. They would send the boys to me as a test of their abilities as well as their resolve. A small part of me admired the spirit as they lost spar after spar with me. It did not take long for me to realize who among them might become good enough for more serious fighting. It also gave me a chance to gauge which ones were worthy to join my personal guard. These three brothers were exceptional, young and brash but fast learners. The eldest among them would poke and prod at the patience of his younger siblings. His playful jabs would often coax a smile. As an older sibling myself, once I knew his intentions to be pure, a means of encouraging his brothers without seeming weak. Yet he was far stronger than most others here, strong enough to make some of these veterans tremble and stumble. He may have been new, but he already proved himself to be one of those rare individuals capable of making decisions based on instinct alone. He had taken charge of his brothers, Neshrith and Ratchid. Together they seemed almost equal to me. His name was Hakim. Not many words escaped him when he fought, just short grunts and cries. I saw potential within him. I was not the only one to notice the skill of those three. All those in training, as well as their betters, stopped to bow to the Queen who wove her way between them. A gaggle of highborn women and servants followed in her wake. I could see in her eyes she acknowledged the way in which I bristled as she approached. That made me feel somewhat less guilty about losing control the evening before in her presence. Still, I could tell by her demeanor she expected something of me later today. Something she felt was due. An apology or admission of fault. Instead, she merely smiled and invited me to walk with her. I truly wish she would have come to me first before acting so brashly, she said as we grew further from inquisitive ears. Surely you know how dangerous this is. I kept silent to let her speak, knowing her words to ring true, but immediately looking for a way to defend my actions a second time. I prayed for some sort of clarity as to why, but the gods gave me none. My eyes never left the saturated reddish-yellow ground as we walked. We moved slowly along the path toward the gardens. I tried hard to keep my expression neutral, though every muscle ached to lash out at her for being such a pain. Instead, I bit my tongue and answered her as best I could. "Of course I know how dangerous it is," I answered, keeping my temperament even. "I cannot explain why I feel that she is no danger to us herself." For a moment, it was as though I had known her in another life, which only made me angrier. When I gazed into her eyes, it was like looking into. When my voice trailed off, Cleopatra's expression grew more tender. She ceased in her tracks and studied me with those sympathetic eyes. "Your sisters," she finished with a deep sigh. Then, with compassion, added, "Is she as handsome a woman as Layla?" I could not help the smirk that touched the corner of my lips. She lowered her gaze playfully to look me in the eye. At this, I laughed low until the tension between us dissipated into nothing. One of Cleopatra's greatest strengths was always her ability to disarm any man. Even if I wanted to remain irritated, she was simply too kind, too soft-hearted. If there was ever a reason to stop cursing and baring my teeth at everyone around me, then it must surely be her influence. This you will have to see for yourself, I retorted in amusement. It was time to meet the new vampire lest she went rogue and we would have to cut her down. I could not help the feeling of bitter disappointment should that ever come to fruition. I had embraced that the gods would tell me nothing in regard to all the many things I felt. It made me wonder if Cleo had asked anything of them herself as we travelled to the cells in companionable silence. I watched in anticipation as the Queen's god leapt down into the cell first to make sure nothing went horribly awry. Cleopatra nodded the all clear and we followed close behind them. I had to keep from turning my nose in disgust at the sharp, unpleasant smells. The Queen, however, did not flinch, nor did she hesitate in interrogating the newborn. A small part of me felt for her, trying to keep up with the ever-vigilant Egyptian queen. What I had not expected was for the young one to lash out. With surprising speed, she lurched at Cleo with claws drawn like a fiendish animal. The queen managed to grab and lay a blow to the woman's gut that knocked her across the cell. This seemed to enrage her all the more. She got to her feet at a breakneck speed and charged at the queen a second time, her fist connecting with Cleo's jaw. The latter howled in fury, blocked the next hit, and grabbed a hold of her throat and tossed her aside. She rolled a few feet before righting herself. She used the wall as leverage as she lurched yet again, tackling poor Cleo to the ground as the queen retaliated. Being the more experienced fighter, Cleopatra managed to gain the upper hand. Then something within me urged me to stop the fight. The way in which Cleo held her down worried me. I drew my weapon and approached, laying a hand on her shoulder to remind her of who might win if she challenged me. The queen released her and left to gather herself. She was weak from the turning and the fight. I was impressed by her fierce spirit, her defiance, despite her situation. I ordered one of the loyal queen's guard to allow her to feed. She was in desperate need of it, and I could not allow this one to go to waste. Cleopatra urged her to drink from him as she gazed at her askance. I could not help the low chuckle at the face she then made. The smell of the god's blood filled the cell and masked that of its putrid stench. We stood together while she fed. As much as she desired it, she knew better than to take too much lest it kill the god and leave her beyond our control. But what surprised me most was the restraint she possessed. Regardless, it was unusual for a newborn vampire to control themselves so easily. The guard then came to me, and I sealed the wound with a lick of his arm. The look of curious wonder in my eyes as I stirred something within me. That same protective nature, perhaps, or maybe it was just the novelty. I knew she was no danger to us, this strange woman. If she was not one of the Anunnaki, then what was she? If we had not known any better, her story would have sounded foreign and too bizarre. We would have kept her in the cell for fear of insanity. Leave her here as a precaution to herself and others. Lucky for her, we understood well enough. It came as no shock that the Anunnaki created a contraption that allowed one to travel through time. I knew by her appearance that she would attract too much attention. So, once we showed her how to exit the cell, I drew her under my robes to hide as much of her as I could, which, in itself, drew attention, but not as it would have if I had just left her. So on to the palace we walked. Cleo looked at me with an indecipherable yet somehow still mischievous expression as we entered the palace grounds. I loved as I let the poor woman out from under the robes to roam free as she pleased, although those same curious eyes looked around the courtyard. I had to remember it was all new to her, and even though there were many people walking about the gardens, they paid little heed. Most only saw someone moving among them. They knew better than to gaze at one with the queen for too long lest they be accused of overstepping, even if their curiosity proved true and led them away from their duties. We were forced to stop as she studied the murals on the wall. An unexpected smile threatened to give me away as Cleo ushered her onward. I kept silent as the queen answered her questions, feeling for the young woman at the reluctance to stay with us. As foreign as she was to us, I could only imagine how frightening and out of place she must have felt. We escorted her to her assigned quarters, where she wandered in silence. Her soulful eyes were the size of silver trays. She then suddenly turned to address us, asking for our identities. I could not help but bristle at the unexpected interrogation. I tried to reason with her, to explain that we could not reveal ourselves to her just yet, but something had changed in her once again. Those eyes turned dark and furious as she glared through them. I knew then that she had recognized me from the tomb. I raised my palms in surrender and tried to calm her, like a rat cornered by a street cat. All attempts to soothe her had failed, as she was just as stubborn as the Egyptian queen. I did not speak and allowed her to make her first move. I knew better than to approach an already charged vampire on edge. She had just fed, which would make her stronger as well. Never had I been more grateful and more wary of Cleopatra taking control of the situation. She ordered me to leave as she prepared our newborn. It was true as Cleo had said, she would need to look and act like one of us if she were to remain safe.